Kaivalya Clean Kaivalya
Namaste. Welcome to Kaivalya Yoga Gurukulam, KYG. Thank you for joining this session in Kaivalya Marga. Today, in all its auspiciousness, in all humility and reverence, we are going to start the next element in the series, the element of air, Vayu. As always, these learnings are done in a very reverential manner because we are dealing with something which is very, very close and real to our true nature. And therefore, as always, for this mindful learning session, let us begin with 3 Ohms. So here we are in among the 5 elements, we have slowly progressed to the 4th element. It was sometime last year in February, about 5 days before Mahashivratri, the night of Shiva, that I had this chance of visiting yet another Shiva temple that is dedicated to this particular element, Vayu, or air. If you remember, in each of these elements, we visited different Shiva temples. And there are 5 such temples in South India, dedicated thousands of years ago, each one of them dedicated to one particular element. And this one particular temple has been dedicated to the Vayu element. A beautiful temple set on the banks of a river that is flowing towards the north. A very powerful portal. It has always been my ardent prayer that when I begin teaching these, I begin these at these holy places where this learning was perhaps started thousands of years ago by rishis and yogis and sages. So come join me. Even before we proceed on this topic of Vayu and understanding all of that, let us get a glimpse of this beautiful temple in South India. I was not allowed photography or videography inside the temple premises, but at least in the first few minutes you get an idea of the location, the beautiful river. There is a small hill behind this temple which I had a chance to climb to. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, let us visit this temple. This temple is called Sri Kalahasti. It is in a state called Andhra Pradesh in South India. So let us go to that temple and get a darshan of the Gopuram, the tower that represents the deities inside.
Sri Kalahastishwaraya Namaha.
Such a beautiful sight, right? It gives me so much joy to be in these temples, because these are not temples that were built for commercial purposes or for any there was no selfish motive behind these temples. These temples were built centuries ago just for one purpose, so that man will realize his higher self, so that man could connect to his higher self within the portals, within the walls of these temples. It is a different matter that as history progressed and India was constantly invaded by various other cultures, slowly things became different. But if you go back to the origins of these temples, it's very fascinating that there was a civilization at one point that was more or less completely dedicated to the idea of understanding the true self. And that is what Kaivalya Marga is, right? Kaivalya is oneness and Marga is the path to oneness. And the path to oneness cannot be devoid of understanding nature around us. When we begin to understand that nature is part of us, it's an extension of us, and we are an extension of nature, and we are intrinsically connected to earth, water, fire, air, and space, then we begin to understand that our true self is not limited just to the body, and that we never die. A part of us becomes the earth, part of us becomes the oceans, and the real greater part of it merges back into one consciousness that holds all these elements in play. What a fascinating concept. Even if it is reduced to a belief, it is still a most wonderful belief to hold, because that's an empowering belief, and that is why I love this belief. It doesn't make me feel small, it makes me feel as part of an infinitely expanding universe. As you probably noticed, that this temple, this beautiful temple, is known as Sri Kalahasti in Andhra Pradesh. There is a lot of history and legends and stories behind this temple. I have no idea whether how authentic these are, but then they are legends that are associated with something that is so old. And therefore, I want you to enjoy with me some of these stories that are associated with this temple, because it gives us an idea of the importance of the element. Right? At the end of it, we are going to, as we proceed in these classes, in these sessions, we are going to learn about Vayu, types of Vayu, and mudras, and this and that, and so on. But before that, this helps build a foundation. Why was the Shiva temple dedicated? What is the story behind the Shiva temple? Are there any stories that might apply to what we are going to learn? So let's explore that. And we begin that with understanding the meaning of the temple. See, all of these temples are named for a purpose, right? And this name of this particular temple is Sri Kalahasti. So there are three words actually brought together: Sri Kalahasti, Sri Kalahasti, Sri, Kala, and Hasti. What do they mean? Sri, in this particular temple, in this particular context, Sri stands for spider. That's the last thing you expected, correct? Because we think of Shri as abundance, Shreem, and all of that. But in this particular context, Shri signifies spider. Kala is time. Kala Nag. Kala is also a serpent. Because a snake is very subtle. It moves in the dark. You don't see it coming. And time is like that, very subtle. You don't see time, and yet it comes upon you. So Kala is synonym for time. Kala is synonym for a serpent. So you have a spider, you have a serpent, and in of course, before I go further, serpent in Sanathana Dharma, in ancient Vedic texts, is never considered bad, because it is around Shiva's neck, and therefore it is considered he bears time around his neck. That kind of a concept. So it's a very powerful and auspicious symbol in that sense. And then comes Hasti. Hasti is elephant. So you have spider, you have a snake, and you have an elephant. How does one interpret this in these animals, with these animals? It's because in the innermost shrine, and I had the privilege of being there, in spite of the fact that there was only 5 days before Shivratri, and hundreds of people had already begun gathering, because last year they had a festival called the Brahmotsavam. Brahmotsavam is an event in the history of the temples. They celebrate that. And so thousands of people gather. There are cultural programs set across on all the streets. It's like a huge fair, and everywhere there is chanting and slogans and all of this going on. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Shri Kalahasti Namah, and so on. It was already beginning there. And so in spite of that, I had this great good fortune of knowing a priest who was kind enough to say, all right, I have only this much time, come with me, I'll take you straight to the shrine. And he was kind enough to take me there, show me the shrine in just about 20 feet distance from there, and explained to me the significance of the inner shrine. And in that innermost shrine, under the lingam, Shiva Linga, there is the image of the spider, the snake, and the elephant. That is where the name comes from, Sri Kalahasti. It is there etched in the innermost part of the shrine. What has this got to do with Vayu element, one might ask? And I did ask myself that. Because when I think of wind, the last thing that comes to my mind is a spider. The last thing that comes to my mind is a snake. The last thing that comes to my mind is an elephant. But that's how beautiful these approaches were. They make you think beyond the superficial, and then you go thinking deeper and you're like, aha, that is why there is a connection between the elephant and the wind. There is a connection between the spider and the wind. There is a connection between snake and the wind. In our awakening, in the spiritual path, there is a divine consciousness that awakens within us. At least it begins like that. And then you will know that it is not in you, you are in that divine consciousness. That comes later. As Baba would say, the light is in you, then you are in the light, and then you are the light. So these are different stages of perceptions that we gain. But right in the beginning, you say light is in me, God is in me, divinity is in me, right? So for that, when that awakening happens, there are many ways to interpret this. One beautiful way is that awakening can happen in the form of a spider. In other words, it gently crawls, slowly but surely it rises with intense focus, with continuous spiritual practices, with regularity, constancy, constant integrated awareness. We keep doing it. You and I might say, okay, I've done so much, I don't feel any progress. We won't feel it. But like the spider, it is happening. The change is happening. Very deep and very subtly the change is happening. So there is a spider that talks about this awakening, the movement of Vayu, the movement of prana, the movement of the Shakti inside is happening, and gradually the awakening is happening in the form of a spider. The movement of prana in the body, the awakening can also happen like a snake, smooth. And this is, you and I won't really relate to a snake, but then when we get this sudden awakening and a very beautiful feeling and overwhelming emotions, these are all opening of chakras, and the pranic energy pierces through that. A granthi that we call a gate is being pierced, and it emerges in a beautiful way like a snake that goes. And so there is a snake-like energy in this, again subtle and snake-like. And then of course there is the elephant energy that comes suddenly. There is an explosive experience, a sudden flash of light, a sudden creative experience, a sudden vision of your chosen deity, your guru, your God, and then suddenly it's like, oh wow, what was that? Kind of a thing. That is the Hasti power of the Vayu within. It is all the air element within that is making these things happen, which is the air becomes a vessel, a vehicle rather, to carry that prana within. And when the prana begins to move, all of this happens. That is one way to interpret it. Another way, I've also explained it in a video. If we have time today, we will share that video. Otherwise, of course, it's there in the next class, because these are the initial videos I made at the temple. No matter, if you see in the last 5-minute video, there was a loudspeaker going on with the chant. It's beautiful, but also along with it came traffic sounds and noise. And so I wanted to be exactly as I experienced it there. So I've shared that. But there is this subtle spider and the powerful elephant you have on two sides, and in the center is a snake. The snake can powerfully move, it can be very subtle as well. So it has the qualities of both in it. And therefore, when we learn to balance between the most subtle breath, which is in meditation, in deep in meditation, or in deep sleep, how's your breath? It is very subtle. And we need that subtlety of the breath to go within. We saw this in Hanuman Yagna. We saw it in, as you understand, Hanuman, when he wanted to approach Sita finally and be in her presence, that is the Kundalini, the Devi Shakti, he had to assume a subtle form. And Hanuman is an embodiment of this Vayu principle that we are talking about. And so he assumed a subtle form, and because of the subtle form, he introduced himself to Sita. That's a story that goes in the story of Rama. But there is such a beautiful significance there, is if we do not make our breath subtle and soft. In other words, when the breath becomes calm, the mind becomes calm. When the breath becomes subtle and just enough to keep us alive, the mind becomes almost still. And in that stillness, Sita reveals herself. God reveals himself. That is the beauty of the subtleness. But it is also, the breath is powerful, and we need to harness the energy of this awakening. It's not a joke when we say we want to awaken to divinity and divine consciousness. Can our body handle it? Can our nervous system handle that experience? Otherwise, it becomes what? It becomes a matter of philosophy, right? We hear about it, we read about it, we entertain it in our mind for a little bit, and then we let it go by. So that stays as a kind of philosophy that comes and goes. But if it has to translate itself into a real experience, then we need to know how to harness this powerful energy of the elephant as well, control it, and gently awaken the spider. So this harmonizing of the elephant and the spider awakens the snake, awakens the Kala, and then we become Kala Atitaya. We transcend time. Contemplate on this. See what makes sense to you. Keep that as a little contemplation, self-contemplation time when you're perhaps driving or when you have some alone time. What is a spider, snake and elephant, what have they got to do with the Vayu element within me, the pranic element within me? And see what the divine reveals to you. All of these are open to our own interpretations and understanding. I'm merely opening doors for you to explore this further. So thus we have Sri Kalahasti. That is the name of this divine portal. I always call them portal more than a temple, because a portal is, through that a door opens and you connect to something very, very profound. In the presence of the temple, you connect to something very profound. So there is stories around this temple, how this temple came to be, what is the significance. So one of the main stories is the story of Vayu. Vayu is air. So Vayu decided to earn the grace of Shiva. And therefore Vayu did penance. Now it is very important to understand in the story, Vayu doing penance, because Vayu is air and air is always moving. When the air becomes still, one doesn't know, is the air there or no? We don't know that. Of course we know because we are alive, so we are breathing. So that breathing happens because there is movement in the air, correct? So what is the experience of air being still? And therefore Vayu decided to become still and do penance of Shiva, to earn the grace of Shiva. And therefore when Vayu did this penance, which is very, very difficult for Vayu, because Vayu is constantly moving, he steadied himself and did penance, Shiva appeared. So there itself we are getting a very deep meaning in the story, that in order for us to manifest the Shiva from within, first steady the Vayu, allow Vayu to do that penance again. These stories have symbolism. Now one can treat it as a historical event, but it is not presented to us as history. It is presented to us as Puranas, symbolic in nature. And therefore we need to say, all right, so for me to experience Shiva, the grace of Shiva, how can I allow my Vayu to do that penance? And that penance is stillness. So I have to first learn to slow him down gently to a point that he becomes steady. So the story goes that Vayu did penance and Shiva graced him. And Vayu said, Shiva graced him with his presence. He manifested as a lingam in this temple. The lingam in the temple, the Shiva lingam, is not built. It manifested itself in this manner, in this particular form of a story. So Shiva manifested himself, and Vayu said, please allow me to name this the Karpura Lingam. Karpura is camphor. Camphor Lingam. Camphor smells very divine. It's got a divine fragrance. But there's something more unique with camphor. When I first heard the story, I was like, wait a minute, this is Vayu. Vayu is asking for camphor. So there must be something connected to wind. Fragrance is one part of it. What is the inner significance? If you have ever lit a camphor, and many of you from India would do that in a ritual, at the end we light a camphor and we call that the arati. We wave the flame around the deity. And I had a privilege of doing this to Baba himself more than one occasion. It's a divine experience because the camphor has, the quality of camphor is it burns, and when it is done there is no trace left behind. It's not like wood that leaves ashes behind. Camphor leaves no trace behind. So we allow ourselves to completely merge into divinity and leave no trace behind. So that is one of the great significances of camphor. However, that is not what I'm going to explain. The beauty here is Vayu. When you light that arati, I bet all of you may have thought about it or not. That is one flame that can never become steady. That will always be moving. Always be moving. It can never become steady. It is an indication of the unsteadiness of our minds caused by the Vayu in us. Breath is Vayu. Breath is air. Vayu is air. And so breath is our way of connecting to this Vayu element. Breath is the bridge between the body and the mind. Mind is very subtle. I cannot see it. I cannot feel it. I know it is there, but where, right? So we don't know that. Body, I can see it, I can feel it, I can touch it, I can smell it. Everything is there. So this is completely this is gross and this is subtle. How do I go from something so gross and something so tangible to something intangible? How do I go there? How do I make that leap, a jump? The breath. Breath has the qualities of the both. So it's like the spider, the elephant, there is the hardcore tangible elephant sitting, the body with all its senses heavy. I can see it, I can feel it, it's there, I know. If there's an elephant in the room, would you be looking for it? No, it is there. We all know elephant is in the room. So the elephant. And then you have the mind, like the spider, subtle, you can't see it. It moves so subtly, so quietly, right? The quality of the spider, of course we can see the spider, but you get what I mean. What connects these two is the breath. The breath is like that snake. Breath, I can feel the breath, right? You breathe and you can feel it, but you can't see it. So it has the quality of the elephant, the earth, and it has the quality of the mind, which you cannot see. So breath becomes the bridge between the body and the mind. That breath, in this particular penance, Vayu understood that this breath is so difficult to steady, and therefore he said, call this Karpura Lingam. So when we get a chance to meditate on camphor, we say, I need to get this camphor in my mind. The camphor of my mind, the flame that is lit by my camphor, I want to make it steady. And I wanted to eventually offer it to the divinity. Because you light a candle, you can make it steady. You can light a lamp, you can have it steady. But a camphor flame, it's impossible to make it steady. So think about that and connect that with the unsteadiness, the unsteady nature of Vayu. We have to embrace that. We can't fight what is intrinsically true with Vayu. Vayu is always moving. See your breath is always moving, and that is good, right? But we have to first embrace that, then slow it down, and then experience stillness. Okay, we will explore this a little more in depth as we begin to understand the concept of Vayu. But even in these stories that are shared, it's not simply some old legends, old fairy tales and grandma's tales, but there is so much meaning. So I want to open your mind to these kind of understandings. There is yet another story, the story of Parvati. Parvati wanted to attain Shiva with great austerity and tapas. And so she did austerity on the banks of this river, it is believed. And Shiva graces her and blesses her. And Shiva not only blesses her, because that place is so unique, because the Karpura Lingam, it's very difficult to control the Karpura Lingam. That's why I said that Lingam is camphor. So the Lingam, the light there is always in the shrine also. It is constantly moving. It can never be steady there. There is always Vayu present in the innermost shrine of the temple. Right? And so when Parvati worships that Karpura Lingam, understands the nature of the breath and invokes Shiva from that, Shiva comes in and initiates her in the Om Namah Shivaya mantra. Shiva himself, the Panchakshari, Namah Shivaya, Panchakshari, the 5-lettered mantra, which is 5 elements. So he initiates Parvati and she attains Shiva, Shivahood, if you will. So the enlightenment that she attains here is known as Shiva Jnana. Jnana is enlightenment, wisdom. What kind of wisdom? The Shiva's wisdom, the ultimate wisdom, Kaivalya. Shiva Jnana Prasombika, Prasunambika. Ambika is mother, Prasunambika, the one who attained the Shiva Jnana. So this temple is also dedicated to this divine Shakti principle that did tapas and austerity. So there are two stories, both austerities in the temple. So that Vayu means discipline, Vayu means austerity, Vayu means or signifies rather, because without that the breath goes out of control, right? The control of breath, pranayama and all of this we learning, breath means control. So think of that, even these stories have an undercurrent energy of self-control, austerity, penance, and so on. Then there is another story, a very beautiful story, a powerful story of a Nayanar. Nayanars or Nayanmars are devotees of Shiva. And in the last 1,000 plus, 1,000 or 1,500 years, there are about 63 of very, very, very well known of these poetic saints that were born in South India and recorded in history over the last 1,500 years. So there are 63 of them. And the one who, and the Nayanmar or the Nayanar who recorded them, his name was Sundarar. All right, so I'm proud there. Okay, somebody's with my name, I got somebody good, right? So his name was Sundar, not Sundar, Sundarar. Sundarar, the extra is out of respect. So Sundarar recorded all the 63 names, and then their stories and all of that is published in another Tamil literature. These are all very old literatures called the Devaram. In that, one story belongs to this temple, and all of them visited this temple. Adi Shankara visited this temple. All great Siddhas and yogis and rishis have visited these temples in the last 2,000, 3,000 years. One of them is called Kannapanayanar. His name became Kannapanayanar. Kanna means eye in Tamil. Kanna means eye. The one who gave his eye to Shiva, Kannappa, Kannapanayanar. The story is he was a hunter, and he fell in love with the Shivalinga hundreds of years ago. So it was like a forest kind of a place, a small little. All these were small temples, right? In the midst of forests those days. And it was only 500-600 years ago that Krishna Devaraya king built a huge gopuram and expanded this temple. The portal, however, still remains exactly the same. The surroundings became clear, the surrounding became more and more bigger, and so on. So this hunter fell in love with Shiva, was a great devotee of Shiva, and to the shocking shocking surprise, or to the shock of the many who would come to that temple, this hunter would say, all right, I love Shiva, whatever I hunted today, I'm going to offer to him. So he would come and offer meat, even the meat of swine, he would come and offer, because he says, this is all I know. I mean, I'm going to eat it, I might as well share it with Shiva. So he will come and offer meat to Shiva. He will come and offer blood to Shiva, and so on and so forth. He had no quote unquote orthodox practices which were already existing during his time, and And not everybody appreciated what he did. But then he said, this is my only way to worship. And this is all I know. And so there are many stories around his devotion to Shiva. That once the temple was about to fall and he hugs the lingam and the temple falls on his back and he gets protected. And everybody else, while they're running away from the lingam to protect themselves, he says, I don't want my Shiva to get hurt. And he protects the lingam. And so that was he was one-pointed devotion to Shiva. He didn't have to follow any ritual as such, but his only discipline was that one-pointedness. So it is said that Shiva desires to test his devotion, but it was more so to show the people, the villagers around, to show them what is the nature of Kannapa's devotion. So it is said that the lingam, they would paint eyes and face on the lingam. So when they had these eyes of Shiva painted on the lingam, because the lingam is a huge stone, and then they paint. So when they painted that, one of the eye was bleeding. When the hunter came and he saw that one of the eyes were bleeding, he was shocked. He said, what happened? My Shiva's eyes are bleeding. He needs an eye. Where will he go for an eye? He can't see with an eye. So without even thinking, he takes off his dagger, pokes it into his eye, pulls his eye out and sticks it onto the lingam. The story goes like that. We'll try and understand the symbolism in a little bit, but bear with me. And then when he does that, he sees the other eye bleeding as well. He says, oh my gosh, his other eye is bleeding now. And without a second thought, he says, I'll remove my other eye. But if I remove my other eye, how will I know where to place it? So with his foot, he goes and places his foot on the lingam. Again, a big blasphemy. How can you place your foot on Shiva lingam? But he places his foot on the place where his eye is, here, on the lingam. And then he is deciding he's going to remove the other eye. And at that moment, he gets the darshan of Shiva. And he gets emancipation, he gets liberation, he gets that moment, Shiva Jnana happens. And Shiva blesses him. Of course, he gets his eyes back. And that's a very beautiful story. Gross maybe a little bit, but then it's a powerful story, rather. So there is a temple on top of a hill. Right behind the temple, there is the main temple. There is a hill on top of which I went and took the initial shot that you saw of the whole little town and the river and everything. And so there's a temple that is dedicated to Kannapanayanar right on top of that hill. What is the symbolism of this otherwise very disturbing story of taking your eyes out and trying to please Shiva? Is God so merciless that he wants this? No, we have to look beyond that, right? It is the one-pointedness, again, an indication of discipline and focus, which is very desperately needed for Vayu. Vayu has to be focused, just like fire. We have to focus Vayu as well. So with two eyes, meaning two things, it doesn't happen. It has to become one. So he offers one eye. And then when he offers the other eye, in other words, when he is going to a state of complete surrender, without the eye completely, there's a pun on the word eye, if you will. We talk about the Sundar as I and Shiva as the I. We talk of the lower self and the higher self. So these are two eyes. You give up one eye, then you're there with the other eye, and you're ready to completely merge into that eye. That means you have no eyes. It's a pun again. No eyes, then Shiva appears. Very powerful. And so there are each of these stories of Nayanmars and Nayanars, however you want to call them, are very, very, very beautiful. They are devotees recorded in history who actually experienced the highest Shiva consciousness, who wrote poems on this, and that is how they revived the power and the meaning behind this idea of Shiva. They consider Shiva as a tattva, Shiva as an embodiment of love, nothing but love. So that is the story of Kannapanayanar associated with this particular temple. So he was called Tinna, the hunter. From Tinna, that was his name, he became Kannapa. After this incident, everybody realized the extent of his devotion, and therefore he became a recognized saint. So this temple is called the Kashi of the South. it has got such, it is held in such high reverence that it is called the Kashi of the south. Kashi is Varanasi, the oldest city in the world, the headquarters of Sanathana Dharma, if you will. I've been there. I have videos to share. It's a most magnificent place. If you go past the unending bazaars and crowd, you just go past that, then suddenly the most powerful and beautiful energy reveals itself to you on the banks of the Ganges in the north. In the south, this is the only temple that is equated to that Kashi temple. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, there were other temples as well, much bigger than this, much older than this. Why this temple? What is the speciality? In this temple, there is a river. You saw the river in that video. That river is called Swarnamukhi. That river is known as Ganges of the south. Why? Because just like in Varanasi, this river also flows towards the north. A river flowing towards the north is like the river, the energy flowing upwards. In our bodies, north is Sahasrara, south is Mooladhara, south is the earth, north is high up here. So when the river begins to flow upwards towards the north, and so that is the beauty of it. Wherever, even for meditation purposes, even for hermitages and ashrams, and for portals in temples like these, when there is a river turning and flowing towards the north, the banks of those rivers are most conducive for spiritual awakening. This is something you have to try, right? So go searching for a river, or simply book a flight, go to Sri Kalahasti or go to Varanasi, because Varanasi is, again, the river turns its direction and flows north for a while, and then again it flows towards the east. But then there is a flow towards the north. Ganges turns and goes back to her source, because everything comes, the water itself comes from Shiva's head. So everything going down, water itself has the energy to go down. But when that river changes course and goes upwards, then it is considered reversing our energy. We are going back to our source. So nature itself is very conducive at that point, at those junctions where this happens. Swarnamukhi, that stretch of the river in Swarnamukhi, is that where the river is flowing towards the north. And therefore it is called Ganges of the south. It has tremendous power when you sit on those banks and meditate. It's an amazing experience. So this is broadly what Sri Kalahasti is all about. And it is with this prayer that we enter this the subject of Vayu element. I have another video to show, but that's a long video. I don't think we will be able to do it in today's class. However, let me just stop here with this introduction. Contemplate on what Sri Kalahasti means to you. How can you bring together the spider in you, the snake in you, the elephant in you? What is Karpura Lingam? The camphor lingam. Not only is it fragrant, that is one part of it, but that lingam that needs to be controlled, because when that lingam is steadied, the Karpura within us is steadied with the breath, then Shiva manifests himself like he did to the Vayu energy. So let us take those two powerful lessons and begin this journey into the Vayu element with prayer and reverence and humility. And in the next class, I'll share with you thoughts that inspired me on top of that hill that morning. Even though there were loudspeakers all around me, I somehow managed to find a place where I think my voice is fairly audible. So we will listen to that in the next class, and then we'll proceed, allowing this divine energy of Shiva to guide us to learning and applying principles of Vayu in our lives, so that we become more mindful of our connection with this cosmic consciousness that has become all of this. As always, Thank you so much for joining this class. It's always so overwhelming to know that you and I are given this chance to re-explore these ancient truths. We perhaps waited lifetimes for this kind of wisdom to once again surface. And therefore, it is our privilege. Let us use it wisely. Let us fill our hearts with gratitude and continue in this path. I'd like to end this class with one Om and three Shantis. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.